Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Anyone got any paranormal stories from the state of Georgia? I want to be spooked, but it takes a really good story to spooky me when it doesn't affect me due to being miles away. Anyone got any spooky stories which happened in my state?
So this one is a personal experience. You should probably know ahead of time I'm actually a skeptic, but this freaked me the hell out and I still think about this to this day and can't explain it. I used to live in Omega about 5 years ago. The house I was in was actually out in the farmland just outside of town down 319. I was just renting the place for a while from the owner and I didn't stay there long. The reason I left is because I had lived there for about 2 years and things just weren't right. You know how you can walk into a house and it just feels wrong? Like the floors aren't level or something that you just can't quite put your finger on. It was like that. So anyway, I come home one day and I'm taking my shoes off, something flies past the bedroom door, like real fast, and it was white. I didn't know what the hell it was. I was thinking maybe a rabbit or something got in the house. But then I start seeing this thing all the time, flying past the top of the stairs and through the kitchen while I was in the living room. I got freaked the hell out and thought I was losing my mind. So I set up a shitload of rat traps and all kinds of poison all over the house. Killed about 4 or 5 rats, but I was still seeing the thing and the rats and mice were all brown or gray anyway. Do I just start to ignore the thing? I thought maybe I was just losing my mind and it was stress related. Then my friend was over one day. We were watching the Super Bowl and eating Cheetos, just chilling out drinking some beer. Then my friend says, "Hey, when did you got a cat?" I was like, "What are you talking about? I don't have a cat?" And he said, "Well, what the hell was that just shot up the stairs?" I kind of realized at that point maybe I just wanted to see some shit, and I told him about what I had been seeing. Needless to say, it freaked him out and he said we should just go to the pub or something because he didn't want to be in the house anymore. I didn't blame him, so that's what we did. After that I told my mom about what I'd been seeing. She isn't the most devout Christian from a religious standpoint, but she is a firm believer in stuff like good vibes, power through faith and such, so I figured she would have some insight or something. She told me I should try burning sage in my house. I thought that was like dorky TV, witchcraft type crap, and I asked her why would I do that. She said that in best case scenarios it's supposed to help calm a house down spiritually, and in the worst case it would at least make me feel better if I didn't believe her. So I was like, okay, sure, why not? It's not like the rat traps were helping cause I probably had killed all the rats already. So I went home and burned some sage in the house, yada yada. It didn't really seem to do much except kinda stink to me, but I figured college, so why not try it at least? I can't say that the stuff actually helped. I still saw the thing in the house, but it was a little dimmer maybe? Like it didn't draw my attention as much. I figured this might just be a placebo effect for all I know. I still wasn't convinced I wasn't just losing my mind to anxiety. I figured this could just be like a self-fulfilling prophecy situation, so I tried to just ignore it and stay out of the house more often. That worked until one day. It still really bothers me thinking about it. Let me stress to you the anxiety I feel right now just remembering. I'm hoping right now that whatever I saw I'll never have to see again. I was coming home from a trip to town. I met my buddy at the supermarket and split a 6-pack with him and grabbed a bite to eat. I pulled in the driveway coming home. I still remember how dark it was. It was a little past midnight, but it seemed so much darker than it usually was. It must have been a new moon and overcast or something because it was dark outside. So I walked up to the house and opened the door. I headed through the kitchen and dropped my Taco Bell on the counter. I walked through the living room and went and took my shoes off in my room and grabbed my phone charger. That's when shit hit me really hard. I mean, like, you know that feeling you get like total panic when something hits you really fucking hard mentally? Like you turned a corner and there was a bear in your face type reaction. I don't know what it was, but I remember it being quiet, like too fucking quiet. It was so quiet it made me sick. I didn't really know what was up at first, so I just walked back towards the kitchen to get my food. I started losing my shit internally and then I walked into the living room. I noticed right away what I didn't notice when I came through the living room from the opposite direction. There was something in the corner of the room just standing there, hunched over, not really moving, between my cabinet and the window on the other wall, pretty much in the corner. It was almost a stance you would make when you put your arm on the wall and lean your head onto your arm. I thought it was a person who had broke in, so I yelled at it. I basically said, "What the fuck are you doing in my house?" Let me stop here to explain something to you guys. We have all seen TV shows where people have seen shadows in their house or whatever and they are like, "It just looked black derp and the tornado sounded like a train." Let me tell you, this was not a fucking shadow. I don't really know what the fuck it was, but when I flipped on the light, that corner of the room, all of the light was like it was drained out of that corner and that thing was just standing there. It was vaguely a human shape and it definitely had volume to it. It wasn't some mist shit or something. If I threw a lamp at it, it probably would have fucking hit the thing like it would hit you or me. There was a head, 2 short arms, and I couldn't make its legs. The bulbs in the chandelier blew out about 2 seconds after they were turned on, and this fucking thing crawled under the cabinet that was like 5 feet away from it. It did this so fast I almost didn't see it. It just slipped under there like its body collapsed and it just deflated under the cabinet. All of this happens in about the span of 3 seconds, but it scared me absolutely shitless. I literally ran like fuck out of the house and plowed the door to get the fuck out. I jumped in my truck and drove an hour to my parents' house. I was so fucked up. I was dreaming out the whole way there, thinking, what if it follows me, or what if it was in the truck with me right then? I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I couldn't even breathe for like 10 minutes. I wasn't able to sleep for weeks afterwards. Eventually I did go back to the house, but I always found any reason not to stay there. I'd bum at my friends' houses or something. Is only a few hours out of the week, but I noticed things even the short time I was there. My keys moving across the kitchen and such. I couldn't take it. A few months later I was able to move out. I moved out of town, and as far as I know, no one had seen anything in the house since then. I'm still feeling anxious writing this. I've never seen anything like that before or since. I still don't know what it was, but I never want to see it again. I've seen some people on TV talk about shadow people, but the description they give never sounds right. I've always tried to find a way to dismiss it in my mind, but there is no way my eyes could ever lie to me that badly. If I was losing my mind, I'd rather be put down than have to see some shit like that. That's pretty much it. To this day I'm still trying to find out what I saw. I don't know if there was a gas leak and I lost my shit or what, but I still can't explain what happened. I talked to a preacher about it once and he told me it may have been a failed possession or something, but he was Catholic, so I didn't really take his word for anything since I'm Methodist, and to me they are kinda nuts. I still get freaked out, you know? Like when it gets super quiet at night and stuff, it reminds me of that night. I don't want it to ever be that quiet again. I can't explain how terrifying it was just to feel the silence that I guess that thing caused. Not sure if I'll sleep well tonight now that I'm thinking about it again. Worst thing is, the only way I'll probably ever get closure is if I saw the thing again and found out what it was. But I'm sure as fuck not doing that, not in a million years. I'm gonna lurk for a while and try to chill out a bit.
Wow, that's honestly scary as fuck. Can you draw a picture of what it looked like?
I'm in bed posting from my phone, so I don't really have any way to. Plus I don't really know if I want to. Do you think that would be dangerous? Like provoking something? I don't even want the image in my house, to be honest. I put Autodesk on my phone and did my best. Maybe someone else has seen something like this. This is what it looked like when I first came into the room. It was facing away and the cabinet was on the left and the curtains were on the right.
A bit of background of who I am and what I do for a living. This will give a bit of context on how I've come across these reports. For the last 15 years I've been employed as a licensed psychologist in Virginia. The firm I work with takes subcontracted work from the federal government. The purpose of this work is to give psychological evaluations and reports on cases that the state doesn't want to be subject to various oversight agencies. If there is an instance where the feds needs an interview and analysis done quickly and discreetly, then we are hired to do this. The pay is good and the job has allowed me to travel all over the country. But with all that exposition out of the way, it's time to move on to the story. Be an area in the 912 area code of Georgia. Be an industrial area used mainly for the manufacturing of chemicals. For about 3 weeks the nighttime security has been reporting to their higher-ups about sounds in the woods surrounding the area. Wildlife in the vicinity isn't uncommon, but what is unnerving the guards is the volume the sounds are being made at. They are reporting rustling in the woods like a truck is moving through it, followed by what can only be described as a massive fan oscillating. Reports continue for a few more days, but finally the latest claims makes the nearby chemical plant take action. The security detail reports about a very musky odor coming from the woods in the direction of the sounds, followed by a fog of white vapor rising from the ground. Fearing a chemical leak from underground pipes, they call in a state inspector. The idea was for the state inspector to supervise the plant's hired inspector to get an investigation without any heresy between the company and the government. They go into the woods to do their inspection. 2 days later I arrived in the area after a flight. My purpose was to interview the state inspector. I was to find out for the feds and the EPA why there was 1 dead man and 3 others severely injured. I was not there to solve a death but rather to interview a state employee to register their state of mind. I arrived at a local hospital in the same city as the industrial area. I called my contact and they came down to the parking lot to greet me. I was ushered into the inspector's hospital room by 2 police officers. In it I see a man of Middle Eastern ethnicity. He looks to be in his late 40s. His face is swollen like he has had an allergic reaction. There are yellow welts all over his face and neck as well as his arms and hands. He is wearing an oxygen mask. The man has clearly been in a lot of shit. I sit by him and begin to get to work, introducing myself and beginning to make a dialogue between him and myself. He is hesitant to talk at first, but after an hour or so we are able to get down to the matter at hand. He tells me that initially he and the other inspector did a cursory look into the areas where the wounds, smells, and vapors were coming from. They found a curious sticky residue on the foliage and tree bark. The ground had been disturbed with what looks like drag marks dotting between the trees. Only these markings would have to be made by something the size of a small car. They could see where nearby trees had been leaned over like a tractor had pushed into them. Hearing this I asked the man why hadn't the company alert the police. If there were signs or unauthorized activity, then law enforcement should be made aware, especially around dangerous chemicals. The man in his hospital bed chuckled, then coughed.
I asked them the same question, but as far as they knew, nothing was out of the ordinary, aside from the reports of sounds and movement in the woods by trigger-happy night guards.
I continued my interview with him. He explained that later in the night they were going to go into the woods with a group of security to see what was the source of all the commotion. Night fell and the 2 inspectors accompanied by 3 security officers made their way into the woods when the sounds began. He said they walked closer and closer past the pine trees towards the noise. As they did they could make out what sounded like something large being dragged on the ground. They then heard slurping sounds and a slight buzz. The guards got nervous and upholstered their guns. The 5 men made their way closer and closer. As the man was telling me his story, his heart monitor began to increase in its beeps. His face made a twisted sneer of disgust as he recalled to me the smell they were engulfed in as they were about halfway from the epicenter or the noise. He said it was a vile combination of rotten eggs, burning tires, and decaying deer. It was at that point that they began to see the white vapor on the ground. Eventually they made their way to be almost on top of the sound. The man took a deep breath and said,
That's when the shooting started.
One of the guards saw it first and began to unload into a black mass in front of the group. There was a loud shriek like nails on a chalkboard and a vuvuzela. The man motioned with his hand and said that he shined his flashlight onto the mass. He went quiet for a few moments, but slowly he told me what he saw. It was what he described as a cross between a wasp at the front, but in the back was like a slug. It was about 5 meters in length and 2 meters high. It began to move towards them at an astonishing pace. It released the foul-smelling white vapor from holes in its body every time it moved. There was barely any time to act as the creature swiped at the group with its insectoid legs and knocked all of them down. The man looked down and told me that was the last thing he remembered. We finished our interview from there and I left him to himself. The report was handed over to my contact. I left it to him from there. The industrial area was closed for 18 months for renovations. The woods around the area was bulldozed. I am unaware at what point during the encounter did the other inspector die. 3 of my colleagues interviewed the other witnesses. Officially, the death and injuries are because of an animal attack. Pick related as a sketch one of my colleagues was able to sneak. It is a rendition from one of the guards of what he saw. My job brings me to a small town near Savannah. The town has a local legend about a ghost light that moves up and down a track. Locals stay away for the most part except for thrill-seeking teenagers. I arrive in the mid-afternoon and make my way to the county's sheriff department. Outside, parked in his black car, is my contact. He is a lanky old man who constantly has a cigarette in his mouth. We exchange pleasantries and he leads me inside, where I'm brought to a room used for integrations. Inside is a detective and another man. My contact leaves and I get to work. The deflective introduces me as an analyst from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to the other man. The middle-aged Hispanic man squints at me and nods.
I already told you my story over and over. Men, look at the tape and tell me if I'm full of shit or not,
he says to the detective. I sat down and introduced myself to the man, telling a lie in the process to keep with the detective's story. The Mexican man scoffs and pounds his cuffed hands on the table.
I didn't do shit. Look at the tape, asshole.
I began his interview and started by asking him about the tape. He was referring to CCTV footage of the railroad where he works. From the briefing I received from my contact, I was aware that the mangled body of an 8-year-old girl was found on the tracks. The man in cuffs worked for the railroad and was instructed by the local law enforcement to gather up all the CCTV footage from before the incident. I'm also aware of the fact that this man is a suspect in her death. Turns out detectives had done a sweep of the area and found a shack in the woods about a few dozen yards from the track. In there they found evidence that someone was being held against their will. From the toys and size of the chain and collar, it was determined to be a young girl. They found some things linking the man in custody to the shack. The detectives had the accusation that the man was holding the girl against her will to assault. But she broke free and was hit by a train in her escape. The theory had much more weight behind it when they discovered the man destroying hundreds of hours of CCTV footage. The suspect was fiddling in his seat. I moved the talk towards the topic of the tape he is claiming will prove his innocence. He leans forward in his chair.
They have it here. Make them show you.
I lie and tell him I will, but first I need him to give me his account of what's on the tape. His posture tenses up and he begins to tell me his side. He was collecting the video footage as the police had requested, but stopped when he was on the feed that was from about 3 a.m. the night before the body was discovered. He said he saw on the tape the girl run from the woods to the tracks. She looked disheveled and panicked. I noticed he had a look of satisfaction when he said that. He continued to say the girl rested on the tracks for a bit to catch her breath. But in the footage you see a bright light off in the distance. The girl then gets up and looks towards the light that's coming closer. She doesn't get off the tracks and waves towards the light getting closer to her. The man looks me in the eyes and says,
You won't believe this shit, but man, the light was in the center of a black cloud, like the size of a dog.
He said he saw on the tape that the black cloud floated a few feet off the ground. It had a bright light in the center of it. The mass floated towards the girl who didn't move, like she was frozen in place. The next thing he saw on the footage was the light glow so brightly that the screen was a white for a few moments. After clarity had returned, the body of the girl was on the tracks. Torn up and chunks missing like she had been mauled and partially eaten. The detective beside me let out a snarl and spit in his cup.
That's his bullshit story, but where the fuck is the tape?
The cuffed man bangs his hands on the table.
I gave it to you cocksuckers. Y'all have it, you bastards. I didn't do this, man. Please.
Feeling like my job had been accomplished, I excused myself from the room as the discussion between the other two men became heated. My contact was outside the door waiting for me. We exchanged forms and paper, then I made my way out. Officially, the story was a runaway Jane Doe was accidentally hit by a train. The suspect was found hanging in his cell a few days after I had left. A fence was put up around the tracks with no trespassing signs. All CCTV cameras were removed. According to a colleague of mine, there was a tape recovered, but it had gone missing around the time the suspect was found to have committed self-end. There was no train scheduled to make its way down those tracks at the time the girl had allegedly got hit. The city of Waycross, Georgia is the setting for this story. The municipality is within the area of Ware County. The county has a part of the Okefenokee Swamp in its borders. Like most southern towns, the younger crowd tend to spend the weekends down in the wilderness partying and hooking up. It was hot in Georgia in April when I arrived in the city. I was there to interview a park ranger from the Okefenokee Nature Preserve about an experience he had. On this occasion, my contact was not there to meet me. Since this was considered a low-priority situation, I was allowed to do this on my own and send my report via fax to him. But my copies had to be destroyed after he confirmed what he had received. I pulled up to the witness's house, a medium-sized barn-style building out by Route 38. I knock on the door and a man about a few years younger than me answers. We exchanged our information and I went inside to conduct my business. He tells me that he has been at his position for a few years now. Being in that swamp, he has seen and heard things that he can't explain. But this one takes the cake.
Do you believe in ghosts?
I tell him that I believe people have encounters with things unexplainable. He smirks and hands me a folder full of assorted papers.
After last week, Mr. Anon, I believe that ghosts are real. And that there is something buried in that swamp.
I open the folder and skim over the contents. He has photocopies of pages from clearly old and worn books. Notes taken from him interviewing locals, complete with their numbers and addresses. There were even satellite maps of the swamp with markers to indicate what he labeled as sightings and historical locations. From reading it all, it seemed like he had put together a conspiracy theory that an 18th-century pirate had buried his treasure in the swamp and his ghost haunts the location to protect it. We discussed the matter for a bit and I concluded that he is an adamant believer in his theory. He explains that after what he experienced, he had to come up with some explanation for it all. We begin to talk about what happened. A brief time back, he was on duty patrolling the swamps. He was on the lookout for teenagers out there partying. Sure enough, after a time he found just that. He was going to make his presence known, but before he could, he saw the teens start to panic. One of them, a black teenage male around 15, was swinging something around at the others. He was wearing a Letterman jacket and had a strong build. Cautiously, the park ranger approached the group to defuse the situation. The other teenagers saw him and began to scream for his help. They said that their friend found some old sword in the mud and started to attack them after he picked it up. Sure enough, when looking in the young man's hands, he saw what appeared to be a rusty cutlass being wielded by him as he swung it around wildly. Steadily, the park ranger pulled his sidearm and began to shout for the teen to drop it. That's when he saw something that shook him. Behind the teenager was a figure a few inches higher than him. It was incorporeal but still could be faintly seen. It looked like a man dressed in colonial attire with a tricorn hat. The figure looked like he was in a state of decomposition. His face had rotted away to reveal a skull. Moss was layered over his torn and rotted clothes. The sudden appearance of a specter was horrifying on its own. But when the ranger realized something, the true terror then sunk in. Every move the teen made, so did the figure. When he swung an arm, then the rotted corpse did so as well. When he moved, it moved. The spirit was piloting the boy. The park ranger looked at me with shame.
I ran. I left those kids. Mother of God.
He placed his hands over his face and tilted his head down. The ranger, in his disgust at himself, told me that he just turned tail and ran for his truck. He said that he could hear the teenagers running in all directions. But he didn't look back. He didn't radio it in. He just left. It was the next morning that he went to report an incident to his superiors. To his surprise, the teens from the night before had called the police. They did so after they left. It was mentioned that the teenager with the sword had apparently gained his composure and dashed to his car with the sword in hand. He drove off into the night. When the ranger heard this report, he came clean about his involvement and his cowardice. They put him on leave without pay. Now in the present, we finished up the interview and I left him. He gave me copies of his research. I turned them over to my contact alongside my report. Before I left, the man asked me if I believed his story. If I thought he was a coward. It doesn't matter what my answer is. What matters is to him there was now a Waycross teenager with a haunted pirate sword out there in the ether. I noted his concern in my report. This was last year. Since then there have not been any updates that I had heard of. Only that there is now a job opening in the Okefenokee Park Services. But according to my colleagues, there has been some urban legend about the story spread in the local area.
Be a stupid Florida kid visiting Northwest Georgia. I stayed in a cabin on Lookout Mountain with my parents and brother. Parents take my brother up to the top of the mountain, and I decide to stay. I'm bored within 30 minutes and decided I wanted to go. There is a wide trail behind the cabins leading up the mountain and into the woods. More like a dirt road. As a stupid kid with no understanding of mountains, I decide this trail will definitely take me to the top of the mountain. Where my parents are, I walk for a while. The path is winding but has no turn-offs. Enjoy a relaxing walk. Path grows a little smaller and unkempt the further I travel. Stones and weeds litter what was once packed and graded earth. I pass by a dilapidated barn reclaimed by briars. Walk further and see some old heavy-duty equipment lying in the leaves and brush. Giant funnel-looking things. Rusted metal barrels. A plow attachment. Barbed wire and other junk. There is no birdsong here. Kinda creepy whatever. I will continue. The path is super narrow now. Only a footpath squeezing between trees. It's eerily quiet. Only hear the crunching of leaves under my shoes and the wind picking up. Suddenly, the footpath opens up to a huge red clay clearing surrounded by dense wood. A car is parked in the dead center. It's a 1960s classic Dodge Dart, in perfect condition. I don't give two shits about cars, but this thing was immaculate. Shiny baby blue paint clean enough to reflect the clouds in the sky. Spotless cream canvas top. Full leather bench seats. Chrome grille and hubcaps nearly blinding. Can't believe I'm seeing this here. Don't even see a way this car could have got up. Let all me still be this clean. There is a middle-aged Redditor man sitting in the driver's seat. He's wearing an outdated-looking suit and fedora maybe, all black with black sunglasses. Kinda weird, he looks so outdated, but with it's kind of backwoods, lost in time sort of area. Most people are friendly here, so I wave and smile. He waves and smiles back. I approach the car, ready to hit him with the, "Hey awesome car," when I hear some kind of rustling through the leaves behind me. Turn around and don't see anything. Maybe it was a squirrel. JPEG, shrug. Turn back to the car, but it is completely different. Covered in rust. Only a few specks of paint remain, hardly blue. An absolute junker. Canvas top ripped wide open. Grille and headlights busted. Leather seats dry rotted, exposing foam and springs. Not a thing was gleaming on that brown rusted pass, and there was no suit man anywhere in sight. Thoroughly creeped out and confused. Back away slowly. See, the small path continues on the other side of the clearing. Still dumb. I think that taking the path further will bring me to my parents. Better than going back and waiting alone in a cabin, I reasoned. Eerily quiet still, trying to shake off what happened as I continue. Maybe I just imagined all that. Start hearing flies. No sounds but my footsteps and the buzzing of flies. I don't see any flies, but the buzzing grows so loud as I continue, now frantic. Sounds like being surrounded by dozens of flies. I suddenly get smacked in the face with the smell of something very dead and rotting. It burns my nose and waters my eyes. I scan the area and don't see anything. The unending and droning sound of flies and a smell of decay overwhelm every sense. I'm filled with terror and book it back down where I came from. Past the clearing and rusted-out car. Past the farm equipment and old barn. Back down the large trail and to the cabin. My face when parents and bro were already back. I tell them everything. The next morning we all went out to the trail so I could show them the car. The trail makes a full circle, never narrowing or climbing up the mountainside. It is wide and winding, with no turn-offs. Graded and packed dirt road. There are no other trails. We circle 3 times before everyone gives up. I circle 3 more times by myself because I can't believe or explain it. Never found the path or clearing again.
This one comes from a colleague of mine. In the Athens, Georgia area there was a state senator who had purchased a few hundred acres. He wanted to develop some of the land for personal recreational use. But there was an old woman who was squatting on the land in a shanty cabin. The senator tried to get the local police to evict her from the land, but no one would come and do it. Call after call, the senator tried to use his power to grease the wheels and get what he wanted done. But after a few months nothing came of it. So he went directly to the mayor and asked what exactly was the problem. The 2 men had a meeting at a local bar. Between drinks the mayor told him that frankly the townsfolk were scared of the woman. No one knew how old she was, but growing up they all remember her living out in the woods in her little cabin. Even people in the nursing homes recall the woman always being there. The mayor settled down to a hushed tone and leaned into the senator's ear to whisper,
"They say she's a witch."
At this point the senator reached his limit and stormed out of the bar. Come hell or high water he was going to get that hag off his land. So he did. He hired some muscle from Columbus, Georgia to come and do the deed. They finished the job by going into the woods and tearing down the cabin and burning it to the ground. The woman's belongings were tossed beside a ditch on a nearby road. The senator felt satisfied after finally getting rid of her. Soon he would be able to use the land for whatever he wanted. But that night is when the trouble began. It had started simple enough that afternoon when the dogs became timid and twitchy. The normally assertive Labradors had become a whiny mess, staying under the porch. The next thing is while making dinner his wife startled him with a scream. Running into the kitchen to see what the matter was, he found his wife swiping a pan at something sitting in the window. It was an opossum that was hissing at his wife and then him when it saw he was in the room. Before he could get it, the vermin jumped off the window and ran out into the yard. It disappeared out into the bushes near the woods. He calmed down his wife and made a promise to call an exterminator the next morning. Later, after the sun went down, he tried to bring the dogs inside, but they remained under the porch. After a while, he had had enough and just left the dogs to stay under there for the night. He came in and he joined his wife and newborn at the table for their dinner. During their spaghetti dinner, they discussed the dogs and the opossum incident. All was strange but well nonetheless. But then his wife looked down at her plate and began to gag. She pushed her plate away from her and rushed towards the downstairs bathroom. Not wanting to leave his infant daughter by herself, the concerned senator called out to his wife. He could hear her gag and retch, then finally vomit her stomach into the toilet. This went on for several minutes as she emptied her body of their dinner, lunch, even breakfast. Finally, after feeling enough concern for his wife, the time came to check on her. So he scooped up his daughter and walked with a steady pace to the bathroom. He leaned into the room and asked his wife if she was okay. She nodded in the affirmative, but her sweaty red face and bloodshot eyes were more honest. The man grabbed a towel and handed it to his wife so she could clean herself up. After she had freshened up, her husband asked her what was going on. She answered,
"When I looked down at my plate, the noodles, they looked like writhing opossum tails."
The man didn't know what to think, but she knew what to do. Clearly his wife had become stressed out because of the incident with the vermin earlier. Doing what he thought was best, he sent his wife upstairs to lay down. In the meanwhile, he cleaned the kitchen and then laid their daughter down to bed. Feeling stressed himself, he sat down to watch some football, but he found he just couldn't get comfortable. He felt like something was watching him, like he was being observed by a predator. He looked across the living room towards the sliding glass doors. Then he saw it. Pressed up against the glass doors was an opossum. It was standing on its hind legs with its front paws pressed onto the glass. Its breath fogged up the door as it looked dead at him. Startled at first, he soon rose from the easy chair and grabbed a broom. Anger fueled his steps as he inched closer, but he felt something was off. His gut told him to hold on a second. From that, he was able to notice that the opossum's breath grew stronger as he came closer. The less distance between him and the door, the more rabid the vermin would breathe, and the foggier the glass would get. Like it was getting excited at him coming out there. His thoughts were soon cut short as his ears became deafened by his wife's screams from upstairs. Without a second thought, he ran upstairs to check on his wife and daughter. Expecting the worst, he burst into their room. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" he pleaded over and over. His wife was cradling their baby as it too cried like his wife. The grown woman sobbed and wheezed for breath as the infant squalled. He grabbed her shoulders and looked her in the eyes to console her. SHH, I'm here, baby, I'm here. It's okay, it's okay." Her lip trembled as she began to speak.
John.
"Yes, baby, what's wrong? Please tell me, please," he pleaded.
"She wants to eat our baby, John. Oh God."
She managed to get out before going back to sobbing. It took over an hour to finally get them both to calm down, but they somehow managed. Today was one of the most disturbing days he had ever lived through. But for that night, he wasn't taking any chances. He and his wife had moved to a windowless bedroom for the night. He had locked the door and placed his 9mm under his pillow. In the morning, they were going to leave for their relatives for a few days. But for tonight, he somehow convinced her to stay. Sleep had come to her and the baby surprisingly quick. But he wasn't so lucky. What his wife had said echoed over and over in his head. The memory filled him with dread, but not as much as the memory of the opossum staring him down, panting as he approached it, its frantic eyes almost begging him to come outside. Despite all that, he was able to drift off to sleep. He couldn't remember his dream, but he will never forget its final moments before he awoke. In the dream, he came to a clearing in the forest. Standing on a hill was a naked woman. From her leather-like wrinkly skin, he could tell she was very old. Her gangly frame turned in his direction. Her body, barely skin and bones, turned to fully face him. A disgusting sight of decrepit flesh filled his vision. Blemishes and boils dripping yellow pus dotted her emaciated frame. Hair long, tangled and gray, spouted out and dangled from her hair, forearms, and privates. Her wicked face, more like a skull, had a grimace of pure malice and unfeeling but calculated predation. She raised a bony finger to him and hissed like an opossum. The man's eyes popped open and jolted him out of his dream and back into reality. But he soon found a new waking horror. He had been unlucky enough in his life to experience sleep paralysis before. His mind instantly remembered the feeling as the recollection let him know it was happening now. He was awake, but he couldn't move. His brain sent signals to get up or raise his arms or legs, but nothing came of it. If he wasn't panicking then, when his eyes moved down, he was then. There, sitting on his legs, was an opossum, looking him in the eyes. He tried to move, to scream, to do anything in his power, but nothing came. The opossum began to smile, a human smile, with human teeth. Then he could move. The opossum was gone. He jumped out of his bed and scanned the room. He looked over to his wife, but she was sound asleep. He made his way over to their daughter's crib. She was in a similar state. He wished he could have a sigh of relief, but that never came. Instead, he took his gun from under the pillow and held it in his hand at the ready. He stayed that way for the rest of the night. Finally, in all its glowing mercy, the sun did rise. He felt like that the ordeal was over. After checking on his wife and child for a final time, he made his way downstairs. He checked the house and all seemed well, but he just had to go outside. He couldn't help himself. After everything that had happened over the most hellacious night of his life, he just had to go out there, whether it was out of selfish curiosity or a dangerous show of dominance. He wanted to go out there and make his presence known, to show that despite all of that, this was still his land. So he did. He opened the door and went outside. There of his land was the tore-up and mauled remains of his dogs. Their blood and flesh coated the grass as loose organs had been thrown here and there. The viscera mixed with the morning dew to vividly paint the land and the man's mind with the image of gore. He reported it to the police, and the next day my firm had sent someone down there to interview him. The official story was an opossum infestation of the land had attacked a predator that then killed the dogs. The senator ended up selling the land and moving to Atlanta.
I live around the Macon area, and there's definitely some weird shit out there. I'm living there for a few years while in uni. Working the overnight shift at a gas station. Spend most of my shift on my phone or doing my job for the occasional trucker. Look outside, and there's some old woman by the pumps rooting around in the garbage cans. Homeless people usually try and find cig butts to get their nicotine fix. We have an intercom system that feeds to the pumps outside. Turn it on and tell her to get lost. She stops and turns towards the store's direction. I can see her, but she can't see me inside because of ad posters on the store's glass. She starts marching towards the door. I see her holding something metal in her hand. At night the store locks the doors and the attendant has to let people in. I decide fuck that and not let her in. She starts to bang on the glass doors and pull at the handles. She's shouting in Spanish at me with a fuck or shit thrown in here and there. I yell at her and say to piss off or I'm calling the cops. She punches the glass and runs off. After about an hour I'm sure she's gone and I go to make sure the glass isn't scratched. I see that there's some green slime on the door and on the ground. It looks like someone ate green jello and puked it out. It smells like a rotting animal and a burning rubber. I nope it back inside and avoid it. A few minutes later a customer comes in. I apologize for the mess outside and he looks at me like a dumbass. He tells me everything looks fine. When he leaves, I go and look. It's all gone. I finished my shift and the next day I told my manager about the whole incident. She looks me in the eyes and tells me that next time I should mind my own business. I can still smell the slime when I walk through the door. A friend of mine who works for the city says that they find a foul-smelling green slime in storm drains all the time.
My hobby, mostly during summer, is to go urban exploring. I live in the state of Georgia, so you can imagine I have a lot of options. Dilapidated buildings in wide open fields or literal newspaper factories that shut down in the heart of a dense town. There have been many notable things that have happened whilst doing this. I'd love to share a few. The school. One afternoon I got a nice call. A friend of mine wanted to check out an old school. I happily agreed. Packed a little bag for water and lights and etc. just in case. We usually go into the nighttime during these things so we don't cause too much of a stir if we park on a street or anything. It's just less traveled at night usually. So we begin late afternoon and keep going into the night. The school is actually really awesome. It's got cool graffiti all over the walls. Multiple floors, ladders, etc. Perfect stuff for a good night. Some good pics too. We are making our way down the halls. Of course it's a bit creepy. It's nighttime. Taking it slow. We really hear nothing. It was dead silent. We let our nerves calm as the night slowly progressed. Started talking life. Then I can't explain how terrifying this all became. There was a noise across and down the hall we were in. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight like razor blades. My eyes widened and my fingers become numb. It wasn't just footsteps or anything but a thud. A big thud, then followed by running in the opposite direction. We were terrified, but we amounted the running to a teenager messing around just like us and dropping something. We just decided to progress to the noise source to calm ourselves. Just as we were beginning to laugh it off, we turned the corner and there was a body, lifeless. We ran out. It was pouring rain, slipped in the mud and everything. Got to some shelter and called the police and waited. The night was handled by police from there. The preschool. Behind this dry cleaning place there is an old abandoned preschool. It is decked in graffiti. Every wall, everything. I was there with a buddy of mine in broad daylight. We had been there before, but something was a little off. Just a little quiet, honestly. It made us a little nervous, but then again no one was there taking pics for Instagram, so we could tread unworried. We made it down the hall of classes and into what used to be a lunchroom of sorts. It was pretty big, dusty, really bright, let a lot of sunshine in. Kind of pretty. I was a sucker for post-apocalyptic scenes. This was one of them. We kinda took a chill pill, sat down for a sec. Middle of conversation a rock gets thrown at the window. Chips the glass. Doesn't get far cause it hit the window. We were like, maybe some younger kids messing with us. My buddy is a little bit more dominant than I am, so he wanted revenge. I tagged along in a breath of confidence that he passed to me. We went by one of the doors that the rock came from. We saw a shadow kind of glance by. So we said screw it and darted with our own rock. We turned out of the door and instantly regretted being there. There was something, grayish, large in size, darting into the basement of the school, which we never knew existed. My blood ran cold. I was actually frozen. What the hell did we see? I looked to my left into the woods. To my discomfort, there was an extremely large collection of tires and animal bones. And with a rattle from the basement area, my buddy and I bolted to my car and got the hell out. We told everyone what we saw, attached with disbelief, fear, the whole 9 yards. 2 weeks later, the building was burnt to a crisp, with no explanation. We went. There was crime scene tape everywhere. Nothing was on the news. Nothing was said. It just happened and everyone accepted it. The construction site. There's a park close to my home, but venture further and there's a large steel building and 2 large cargo crates by it. My friends and I found it and kept an eye on it for about 3 weeks before we decided that it was definitely deserted. Myself and 2 others entered. Upon entering, we had to get through the door, which was kind of scary to begin with. There was the word "brood" etched into the door, all over the sides of the door and on the frame. Kind of gave my friends a what the fuck look, but we proceeded and the door moved. Inside was a long church pew, a bunk and a back room. I'm sorta ballsy but not enough to go try the back room. But one of my friends did. He opened it and found stacks and stacks of empty suitcases. It was the strangest thing. Night was nearing and we left with 3 suitcases and closed everything up the way it was supposed to be. We took off, but returned to see what the hell the use of the building was now. We all kind of assumed that it was a gang or something. Well, at about 11 p.m. that same night we peered back from a small clearing in the forest parallel to it and saw the place get lit up. There were about 40 people, just kind of gathering in this huge steel building. One of them literally had a torch. Some had masks. This was literally when I was 14 years old. Got away with it because I told my mom I was staying with my buddy and my buddy told his mom that we were staying with our older buddy. Too complicated, but it worked law. Anyways, at this point we are silently freaking out. Once all these people retreated into the building, we booked it and our buddy that could drive got us to his place and called the cops. Within the next week or so the place was cut clean and shut down. Parts of my town had heard word of mouth that it was an actual cult. I've done this for a long time. Might be sharing more soon, mostly if people are interested. Alright, I'll post a light encounter and a crazy one. Here's one about a hotel. My friend and I, he's a climber, and he wanted to take me to this spot where you can go explore several stories of an old hotel. I was hella excited. It was a cool spot and the view from the top was said to be amazing. So anyways, we get there and immediately something is up. There's a guy in a car and on the back is like 10 bikes. He pulled up to us at the speed of light. He looked fucking scary. His face was covered and he said,
"Fuck off unless you want to get popped."
We said sorry and turned around and headed to our car. The guy followed us till we left. We were shaken to the core after that. Here is the crazy one. This one is way more interesting. This is more recent actually. I was at the beach, and it was getting late. Friend and I went for a walk. Kinda cool night, just grabbing ghost crabs and casually messing around. We kind of stopped to watch a heron and then turned around to look at the row of hotels on the beach being lit up. But one was off. Didn't think much of it in those seconds, but we checked it out and it was totally a partial construction site. Half was done, half not so much. We looked around for cars, then listened for people. Dead silent, so we decided to enter through the partially done end. Really nothing special. Then we got to the rooms. Really weird to see it so desolate. Felt wrong to be opening so many doors, as if there were people behind them. We got done with like 5 rooms. Then I turned around out of sheer luck to see that a light was flickering on and off wildly. I was caught off guard. Figured someone was lighting the other end up or something for work. But nope, just the one light flickered. The whole time. We finished another room. All I hear is a crash. I jolt out to see that the light fell and was hanging. It was a long bulb, like the ones in schools. Well, it was hanging and flickering. I was relieved, but shit was happening while we were in the room. My friend suggested the strong winds did it. We were entering the next room and I just heard this fucking hissing, like boiling. I turned around and the bulb popped, and there was a shaggy man holding the wall near it. His head was baldish, his hair gray, his clothes tattered and hanging. It was a homeless guy for sure. I just kind of told my friend that we need to book it. We started running, mad fast. We make it right near him and this guy grabs me. I let my friend go first cause she's a girl and I figured if he grabbed her I could get him off her quick. Anyways, he got me. I turned around and he was screaming in my face. His breath was like alcohol, and shit had a baby. I was sort of freaking out cause I knew I was stronger. But I really freaked out when he started digging into my arm. And then I saw his eyes. His left eye was like burnt and melted shut. It was terrifying, his other eye sort of gray. In those few seconds I threw him off and pushed him back, jolting out of the building. He was following me, tripping over everything, and then started screaming incoherently as we got away. Pretty common homeless peeps at the beach, but scary still.
I was out for a hike along Allatoona Pass. My wife was putting our son in the car. I went up to the grave marker in the front yard of that one home that served as a field hospital during the Civil War. There were 21 Confederates buried there. When I turned to go back to the car, I heard what sounded like a terrified horse shrieking. Another time we were walking our dog along Kennesaw Avenue, Marietta. We heard what sounded like a volley of gunfire coming from the direction of Kennesaw Mountain. This was in the evening long after any musketry demonstrations would have ended. Another time we went to Kennesaw House. The atmosphere was very heavy, but this wasn't apparent until after we had left and stepped outside, where we felt a sudden release of all of that heaviness. It was very noticeable. Also, our dog will not walk willingly along Church Street in Marietta. He will always stop and sit in the middle of the sidewalk and refuse to go any further. The churches on Church Street were also used as field hospitals. Talked to some dudes at the gun range in Resica, and they mentioned how they always get an uneasy feeling from the forest around there.
Hey, X, I'm from science, but I have a story that I thought I'd share with you. Nothing shocking, but it's just something I haven't been able to find an explanation for. I'll have to split up the posts. About 6 years ago, I was 17. A guy I knew for a short time before he moved back to Arizona, I'm in Georgia, told me about something odd he saw. Pretty typical cliché scary story, but kind of creepy. He and some friends were out and about one night trying to find some haunted places around Marietta, and came across some old buildings. They were walking around the area seeing if they could get in around the back, and were rather shocked when they saw someone standing there. It was a girl, probably teenaged, who in his memory reminded him of the girl from The Ring or The Grudge or something similar. She moved towards them in a slow, stumbling manner, and they took off back around to the front and got in their car and left. On the way out, they went over a small hump, and on the other side, standing in the middle of the road, was the girl. He noticed a feature again. One of her arms was fucked up, apparently reminding him of some sort of claw, as if her thumb had been pulled halfway back down her arm and was hanging off, but had healed. Spooky, but I took it for what it was, a ghost story, and forgot about it, even though we had confirmed the story immediately after with others who were there. Fast forward to last year. I haven't talked to or thought about that guy in about 2 or 3 years. A new coworker who had moved to Georgia from Florida, and I had become decent friends. I don't have Facebook, so we talked over Skype a bit, working on side projects and gaming on Steam and stuff. He messages me one night saying he's going to meet up with a girl near the state line. A few hours later, he texts me on his way home.
Fucking be home so I can call on Skype in 30 minutes.
I get a call, and he's white as a ghost. He tells me that on his way home, he was taking the same way he always does, and rounds a corner and almost hits someone walking across the street. He said it was a girl, some girl who looked like she had been in a car accident. Ripped clothes, long black hair.
Like that girl from that Grudge movie.
I don't have the chat logs anymore since it was about a year ago, but he said something to the extent of,
but the weirdest thing was her arm. She had this fucked up big lobster arm.
And he gives an exact description of the girl I had heard about over half a decade prior. He said the girl didn't strike him as paranormal, but she ignored the car almost completely until she reached the other side of the road, at which point she turned her head and looked directly at his car. Not just any spin, but one of those stereotypical horror snap to kind of looks. My friend said,
so I literally shit in my pants and drove home.
No kidding either. He actually showed me the stain in the pants he had just thrown away. I get onto my wife's Facebook and search for the guy who first told me about the girl, and send him a friend request. When he accepted the next day, we caught up for a second, but I asked if I could call. And of course he let me. So I call, and he's a bit busy with some people, but after a couple formalities I ask him, do you remember that girl thing you almost ran over one night when you and EJ went to that haunted place? I distinctly remember his demeanor changing, and he tells me he's stepping outside. He goes,
what the fuck? Why are you bringing that up?
Without telling him about the previous night, I ask him to describe her, since it had been a while and I wanted to make sure my memory wasn't fuzzy. Surely enough, it's spot on. I tell him what happened, and after a sigh he tells me his hairs are standing on end. Not only had that huge coincidence occurred, but he tells me that not 1 week before he was telling someone that story for the first time in years. You get the point. Weird coincidental shit. But I can't explain it. Neither of these guys know each other exists. Each was perfectly genuine. You probably know what it's like to know when someone is shaken. I had never told the first guy's story anyways, because frankly to me it was just another silly little made-up ghost story. And most of my friends aren't interested in that kind of stuff anyways, including the coworker who saw the girl. These occurrences were also 5 or 5.5 years apart, and in parts of Georgia around an hour away from each other. If it were some homeless person, I doubt they'd go from Marietta out to the far side of Carrollton just to walk through the woods. Also, according to descriptions, she was in the exact same clothes. Putting aside the paranormal for a moment, it could be a girl with a condition like ectrodactyly. That sounds consistent with the descriptions of her deformed arm. The fact that she wears tattered clothing, has long, unkempt hair, and is in random, deserted places late at night could mean she's homeless. Maybe it's difficult to get along normally because of discrimination, people's discomfort over her disability. Maybe she has some sort of mental impairment as well that causes her to wander. Either way, it's somewhat odd that 2 people had such disturbing experiences with her. But the odd feelings could come mostly from the shock of seeing a mostly normal person with a rare deformity. That's my best guess.
The Altamaha-ha, also called Alti, is a cryptid in the Altamaha River in southern Georgia of North America. In addition to sightings, it has been the subject of many myths and lore during the time of its discovery by the local Tama Native American tribe in the state of Georgia. which predates British English colonization. The Altamaha-ha is described as having a sturgeon-like body including the bony ridge on its top, front flippers and no back limbs, swimming like a dolphin or porpoise and having the snout of a crocodile. The coloring is said to be gray with a whitish-yellow underbelly. So far, no physical evidence of the Allamaha-ha has been found. It is sometimes shown to be green, so it can camouflage. Is it possible that this cryptid is a large undiscovered freshwater seal?
The Georgia raptor is a troodontid-like creature said to have been sighted in Georgia. On July 25, 2008, an 18-year-old man and his grandfather were hunting deer at night in Georgia when they saw an animal which they described as closely resembling a raptor from the popular Jurassic Park movies. It has been suggested that it might have actually been a troodontid.
This happened to me and my grandpa on a hunting trip in July 2008. I don't see my grandpa very often, so I always take the chance to take trips with him. Grandpa is pretty much an outdoorsman and enjoys hunting, fishing and just being out in nature. Grandpa and I were out in the woods. It was around 3 to 3:30 o'clock on Friday the 25th of July. I was 18 at that time. We were on Grandpa's land in Georgia. It's a pretty place with the typical Georgia woodland and a few grassy plains. We were walking on a little rocky road heading for a site where Grandpa often sees deer. As normal, there were a lot of sounds going on at night in the woods. We ignored most of them and remained quiet to not scare away anything. Suddenly, we heard an unusual noise we never heard before on our many hunting trips. Grandpa looked at me and listened. Then he raised his finger in front of his mouth to show me that we shouldn't make any more movements. I heard a lot of movement and more of the noise. I can't really describe the sounds, but I sure can describe what I saw, even when it was pretty dark. We just kept listening to the sounds as suddenly something came walking slowly out of the bushes and onto the road maybe 150 yards in front of us. My eyes got really big, and at that moment I wasn't even scared, just amazed to see this creature. We didn't move. As crazy as it sounds, it looked just like a raptor from the popular Jurassic Park movies. I just froze because I thought things like that lived many thousands of years ago. It had a long, stiff tail, walked on 2 feet and had short arms. It looked lizard-like and had a huge claw on both of his feet and smaller claws on his arms. Since the creature appeared to us that it could run fast, we decided to just not move at all. It raised its head in the air and it seemed like it was smelling the air. I estimate its height around 5 feet at the shoulders. After sniffing the air, it made these sounds again and turned around and ran off in the bushes. Grandpa and I waited until we felt safe again and then quietly made our way back to the truck and drove home. In the truck, we talked to each other about what we had seen and decided to not tell it to Grandma because she would think we were crazy. I never believed in stuff like ghosts and creatures and paranormal stuff, and I still don't believe in ghosts. But since that encounter, I believe in creatures that science doesn't know about. That's my story, as odd as it sounds. I know what I saw.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentexts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.